So today I'm going to talk about Joan of Arc, who was alive between 1412 and 1431 in the Common Era. She was famous for the role that she played in the Hundred Years' War, which was a conflict between England and France. So to begin with, I'm going to talk a bit about her early life. She was born in 1412 in the Common Era in the village of Domremy. This is a village in the northeast of France between the regions of Lorraine and Bar. Her father, Jacques d'Arc, was a tenant farmer, and her mother, Isabelle Remy, was a devout Catholic. Remy was responsible for instilling a love for the Catholic Church in Joan. Joan was a peasant as a result of this, so she did not have access to an education, which meant she was unable to read or write. However, what she lacked in education, she made up for with tremendous physical and mental courage. Joan also claimed that she was guided by the voices of Saint Michael, Saint Catherine of Alexandria, and Saint Margaret of Antioch. These were all French saints that Joan had been exposed to while attending church with her mother. So to give a bit of context about where Joan was growing up, she lived in a time of social unrest within France. Specifically, the crown was in dispute between the Dauphin Charles and King Henry VI. Dauphin Charles was the son and named heir of the previous king of France, Charles VI, whereas Henry VI was the Lancastrian king of England. The dispute for the crown, as well as for other territories within France, was an ongoing issue between England and France, and the series of events that unfolded in this time period would later become known as the Hundred Years' War. By 1427, the French Valois dynasty under the leadership of Dauphin Charles was in a precarious position. Henry's armies were in control in the north of France, and they were allied with Philip the Good, the Duke of Burgundy, who was in the east. Importantly, Henry's armies held the city of Rheims, which was traditionally the place where French kings were coronated. This meant that the Dauphin Charles had still not been crowned as the King of France, despite his father dying 5 years prior to 1427. So now to go back to Joan, her hometown of Domremy, as seen on the map below, was located at a point of conflict between the Dauphin and the allied forces of England and Burgundy. Therefore, throughout her childhood, she was exposed to the division within France. In May of 1427, she traveled to the nearest Dauphin stronghold in Vaucouleurs, having supposedly been instructed to do so by the voice of the saints. She was initially rejected and returned to Domremy. However, in January 1428, she returned to the same stronghold, and this time the residents were moved by her boldness and her piety. She was sent by the captain of Vaucouleurs to the Dauphin in Chinon on February the 13th. The Dauphin received a variety of contrasting advice from his counselors. Some were suspicious of Joan, being a woman, and others commended her for her piety and commitment to her beliefs. While she was in Chinon, Joan proclaimed her intention was to defeat the English and have the Dauphin crowned at Rheims. Joan then underwent an extensive examination process, primarily by Jean, the Duc de Lasson, after which she was sent to Poitiers to be further questioned. During the questioning, Joan stated that it was not in Poitiers that she would prove herself, it was in Orleans. Given that the situation in Orleans was a desperate one, the Dauphin was advised that it may be wise to make use of Joan. After this ruling, Joan was granted a squire, Jean Dulon, and she was accompanied by her brothers Jean and Pierre. Then, bearing the symbols of Christ on her armor, she made her way to Orleans. So, on April the 27th, 1429, Joan and a force of a few hundred men set out for Orleans, which had been under siege since October of the previous year by the English. On April 29, Joan was informed that the attack on the English must be delayed until further reinforcements had arrived. However, on May the 4th, Joan was inspired by the voices of the saints to go and attack the English. She took up arms and charged towards a fort east of Orléans. To her surprise, there was already fighting occurring, and after being motivated by her presence, the French took the fort. Then, on May 6th, Joan attacked another fort, which evacuated upon seeing the advancing French. But despite the English evacuating, the French were able to attack the fleeing English and defeat them in battle. On May 7th, the French forces attacked Les Tours, and the English capitulated. The following day, the English were perceived fleeing their forts. However, since it was a Sunday, Joan refused to pursue. Overall, the success at Orléans was an instrumental turning point in the Hundred Years' War, and it allowed France to claim the initiative in the conflict. Prior to this, the French had suffered many resounding losses, most notably at the Battle of Agincourt in 1415. This was the first victory since that defeat, and was the inspiration for many French successes later in the conflict. So, after this success, and despite the French victory at Orléans in 1429, the war against England was far from over. The English still controlled vast areas of territory that had previously belonged to the Valois dynasty. The next move in the eyes of Joan was to march onto Reims so that the Dauphin Charles could be coronated. On May 9th, 1429, she met Charles at Toulouse and urged that the French made a move for Reims. However, before Reims itself could be retaken, the French needed to clear the English out of the towns that lined the River Loire. Joan was involved in the campaign along the River Loire, and the majority of the altercations were not large and were necessary to clear the English from their strongholds. However, on June 18th, 1429, there was a large battle at Patay, which resulted in a decisive victory for the French. This was a significant victory because up until this point, the English were by far the most successful army on the battlefield. This victory enlightened the French to the potential vulnerabilities of the English army, specifically the ease with which French knights could decimate the previously formidable English longbow. The Loire campaign was ultimately successful, and Charles was coronated on July the 17th, 1429, and with that he became Charles VII. Joan continued to fight after the king's coronation, and was idolized by the French people loyal to Charles VII. She was involved in an assault on Paris in late 1429, which was still held by the English. This assault, however, was unsuccessful, leading to Joan retiring to the Loire for a brief period of time. However, it was not long after retiring that she began fighting again, and in 1430 she set out to the aid of the city Campan. While she was traveling to the city, she heard that it had become under siege from John of Luxembourg, a captain in the Burgundian army. On May the 23rd, 1430, she led 2 successful attacks against the Burgundians, but was eventually outflanked by English reinforcements. Joan was dismounted from her horse while they were retreating and was captured by the advancing English forces. Joan was put on trial for heresy, witchcraft, and violating divine law by dressing like a man. The Anglo-Burgundian alliance hoped that if she were proven to be a witch, then this would discredit Charles VII's position as king, because he in part owed his coronation to her. The trial began on January 13th, 1431, at the city of Rouen in Normandy, which was controlled by the English at this time. On May the 23rd, Joan was initially condemned to perpetual imprisonment. This was a lighter sentence than was originally planned, and was only achieved after Joan agreed to sign a confession stating she had not received divine guidance. However, a few days later, she was once again observed in man's clothes, and was thus sentenced to death. She was burned at the stake in the Rouen marketplace on May the 30th, 1431, when she was only 19 years of age. So, a quick summary about Joan's life. Ultimately, Joan's impact on the Hundred Years' War was big, but it is not necessarily her military success that is the reason for her fame. There is much debate about how much of a military impact she had on the overall conflict, and the troubled context of the era meant that many of the accounts from the time are influenced by political and religious beliefs. For example, she's often accredited with the victory of Patay, but historical sources have proven since then that she wasn't even in attendance at the battle. However, what is certain is that she conducted herself with heroic fortitude, especially in a time that afforded much fewer rights to women than to men. She also became a symbol for French people to rally behind, and is sometimes accredited with the unification of the French people into a nation with a shared consciousness. In 1920, Joan was canonized by Pope Benedict XV, which officially made her the Saint Joan of Arc. And these are the references. Thank you.